All right, I will say good morning. Mazel Tov, we are Mesillas Hashem, beginning Parak Chaf, chapter 20 in Mesillas Yesharim. Very exciting. Parak Yotes was a beautifully long journey, and now we are continuing still in Chassidus, just a different perspective or a different aspect of it. So the title of this parak is B'Mishkal HaChassidus. So literally translated, Mishkal HaChassidus means the weighing. Mishkal is the weight, weighing Chassidus. What does it mean to weigh Chassidus? So Ramchal writes as follows: Mashitzarech leva'er ata. What we have to now weigh is the following situation. Hu Mishkal HaChassidus hazeh, v'hu inyan ikari ma'od ma'od. The ability to weigh Chassidus, or to weigh, really what it means is to be able to weigh or to measure what is truly Chassidus, is something that is incredibly important. V'teida be'emes shezoi hamalach hakasha shebechasidus. What we're about to describe over here is probably the most complicated part of Chasidus. How so? Ki dakuso rav, because it's very nuanced. V'yesh liyetzer b'davar hazeh knisa gedola, and the Yetzer Hara plays an oversized role in this process, namely, al kein nimtzeis sakanaso atzuma. Therefore, there's a great danger. Ramchal is speaking in very ambiguous and broad terms, which we'll define in just a moment. There are many things that the Yetzer Hara could prevent me or distance me from doing because he makes them look bad. Conversely, there are many negative things that the Yetzer Hara could entice me to do by making them look like a mitzvah. So we'll say, the first thing that Ramchal is pointing out over here is something incredibly profound, which is that sometimes just the simple ability to discern, chapter 20, to discern and to determine what is good and what is bad, is in and of itself a challenge. I will say, if you remember, this harkens back to chapter 3, Parak Gimel, in Zehiros, where Ramchal spoke about the idea that in life, one of the most important things to determine from the outset is what is the Tov HaAmiti, what is the Ra HaAmiti, what is the ultimate good, what is the ultimate bad. Because unless I go ahead and I determine that in a concrete fashion, so everything is off. So the Ramchal is pointing out that in Chasidus is very much the same thing. In Chasidus, kind of knowing what is pious behavior versus what is negative behavior, sometimes in and of itself is one of the most complicated things. So I'll give examples of this. Ube'emes, shelo yuchal ish latzliach b'mishkal hazeh, ela b'shlosh dvarim. We'll say, in order to succeed in this process of knowing, again, what we're just trying to figure out over here is what is truly pious behavior. So in order to be able to know what is truly pious behavior, you need three things. Here we go, three things. Number one, Shia libo yasha shebelavavos, shelotie pniyaso elalasos nachas ruach lafanav yisparach. So we'll say, number one, you have to have a straight heart. You have to have a straight heart. Now, what does it mean to have Steve, thank you so much. What does it mean to have a straight heart? We'll say to have a straight heart means, thank you so much. To have a straight heart means, and this goes back to what we learned in last parak, that my motivation for doing things is for Hashem. That's my motivation. Now, both if remember again, this was a big piece in Parak Yotes. We were speaking about kavana. That whereas the tzaddik may have kavana for good things, like olam haba. I want to have a beautiful olam haba. Nevertheless, even if your intention for spiritual service, or even if the motivation for spiritual service is olam haba, so ultimately, again, motivation for olam haba is still a self-serving motivation. The chassid has to have a totally selfless motivation. Why do I engage in Torah? Why do I engage in mitzvos? Because when I do these things, they amplify the greatness of Hashem. That's why I do it. So Ramchal says, in order to be able to know what is truly pious versus what is potentially negative, the first thing is a straight heart. A straight heart, meaning my intention is ultimately, again, for the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I have no other motives. That's number one. Number two, so we'll say this is number two. Number two is a hard word. So number one, kavana has to be l'shem shamayim. What I do for the sake of the Ribono Shel Olam. Number two, I have to be a thoughtful person who thinks about his actions. Right? I would say hard stuff, right? To be a thoughtful person. I just want to point out, by the way, none of this is new. right? This is all things we've learned before, right? This is really, a lot of this is back to Zihirus. I have to be a thoughtful person who thinks about what he does, both before I do it, while I'm doing it, and after I do it, a willingness to examine the way that I've lived. Incredible. And number 3, well, actually, I'm sorry, not yet. We're still number 2. And ultimately, again, try to fix my ways. In other words, it's important to think about what I'm doing before I do it. But then also after I do it, it's important to be self-aware enough to know, do I need to engage in any type of course-correcting activity? Number 3, we'll say this is beautiful. Number 3 is to be the kind of person who, after he puts in the requisite effort, is willing to literally again cast his burden on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sha'azi Amar Bo Ashrei Adam Oz Lo Bach. That's what David Amal says about such a person. Praiseworthy is this person who has strength within him. Lo Yimna Tov Laholchin B'Tamim. So we'll say this step number 3 is very interesting. Step number 3 is a recognition that, what does it mean to cast your burden on Hashem? It means a fundamental recognition that I can't accomplish anything without the assistance of the Ribono Shel Olam. So we'll say 3 steps. Actually, let's just finish this last one. He says, I'm sorry. So let's stop here. So 3 steps, we're not stopping here, but pausing here. 3 steps in order to be able to understand what is true Chasidus. Step number 1, says Ramchal, a straight heart. Straight heart meaning that my kavana is l'shem shemayim. Back to what we learned in Perek Yutes. What I do for the sake of Hashem. Step number 2 is a thoughtful person who examines his actions, both before he does them, while I'm doing them, and again, an analysis after I do them as well. And number 3, which is to be the kind of person who recognizes that although I have to expend maximum effort, at a certain point I have to say, Ribono Shel Olam, you've got this. You've got this. I place my burden on Hashem, which essentially is saying is to be the kind of person who recognizes that there is nothing in life that I could complete on my own, right? Nothing in life that I could bring to the finish line on my own. I need HaKadosh Baruch Hu's help every single step of the way. If I have these 3 qualities, these 3 ingredients, then I have what it takes to cultivate within myself an inner Chasidus. If I'm missing one of these 3 things, lo yagia el hashleimus, I will not come to a state of completion. V'karav hu li kasha v'lipo. And I will say not only that, but if I'm missing these 3 things, chances are I'm going to stumble and fall in some way. Dahainu, oy ma kavana lo tia muvchares v'zaka, oy yisrashal min ha'iyun b'mash yuchal la'ayin, oy m'achar kozel lo yitle bitchono b'kono. So we'll say, so again, if I'm missing any one of these 3 things, namely, I don't have the right kavanas. When I serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I don't have the right intentionality. Or at the end of the day, I'm not the kind of person who thinks about what he does before, during, or after he does it. Or number 3, I don't have emunah. And I will say, what does that mean to have emunah? In other words, I don't cast my burden on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If I'm missing any of these things, kashalo shlo yipol, I'm going to stumble. I'm going to stumble in life. I don't know. It's just without these are the. I was about to say essentially what the Ramchal is saying is these are the 3 pillars that give a person a sense of Chasidus. Why? Or help me cultivate a sense of Chasidus because they steady me in life. So the absence, therefore, of any one of these pillars, by definition, puts me on unsure footing in the journey of life. But I will say, at the end of the day, if I have all 3 of these things, right, I try to cultivate, and now he calls them a different timimos hamachshava. So I'll say it's just a different term, a little bit more of a succinct way to remember these things. Timimos hamachshava, purity of thought. Now, purity of thought, we'll call it purity of thought, in this context means my kavana is for the sake of Hashem. What I do, I ultimately again do for the sake of the Ribono Shel Olam. Iyun, what does iyun mean in this context? Iyun, I think about what I'm going to do before I do it, while I'm doing it, and after I do it. Ubitachon. Bitachon means that I recognize that as much effort as I put into anything in life, at a certain point, I have to hand it over to God. If I have these 3 things, we'll say, by the way, What a great message. What three powerful pillars to stand on in life. At the end of the day, when you do things in life, don't do it for self-serving motivations. Do it for the sake of the Ribbon Shalom. Number 2, think about what I'm going to do before I do it, while I do it, and after I do it. And number 3, have bitachon. Recognize that you can't bring anything to the finish line yourself. At a certain point in time, it must be handed over to the Ribono Shel Olam. These 3 things are the 3 pillars to steady one in life, and also happen to be the same 3 pillars to cultivate the sense of Chassidus. If I have these 3 things, az yelech betach be'emes, v'lo yi'una lo kora, very beautiful, then I will be able to go through life with a sense of security, and nothing bad will happen. Now, what does it mean nothing bad will happen? What it means, Rabbi says, I'm prepared. I'm prepared to lead a successful life. Hu adar shamra Chana b'nevuasa, ragle chasidov yishmar. This is what Chana said in the Navi Shmuel. Literally, again, the feet of the chassid are guarded by Hashem, which means the chassid, who is a person, again, who has inculcated within himself these 3 pillars, as well as everything we learned in Parak Yates so far, is a person ultimately who has shmira, who has protection by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. David Kimokin Amar, v'lo ya'azov chasidav li'olam nishmaru. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will never forsake his chasidim. He always goes ahead and watches over him. So also we'll stop over here for today. So here again in Parak Chav, Ramchal has introduced us to these 3 fundamental pillars necessary for the cultivation of the identity of a chassid. Tomorrow, in Meretz Hashem, we'll get into the challenges of becoming a chassid. Why becoming a chassid? Sometimes the difficulty in understanding what is chasidus, what's not chasidus, what is good, what's not good. In Meretz Hashem to be continued tomorrow. But again, the intro is so important. With these 3 pillars, Ramchal essentially says, there's nothing you can't accomplish. We'll stop here.